Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of that day, the historic context in which the events took place, the historic ramifications of those events, and we take a look at some people that were born on that day and some people that died on that day. As always, if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, March the 28th. And on this day, in 1979, I have discussed before what happened over in the United Kingdom to Mr. Callahan yesterday. Well, Jimmy Carter was facing a much more serious threat on this side of the Atlantic because a coolant leak in the Unit 2 reactor at the 3 Mile nuclear plant in Pennsylvania led to the reactor overheating and a partial meltdown. It is the worst nuclear accident in U.S. commercial nuclear history, and it's rated a 5 on the 7-point scale for ranking such events. One of the other reactors at the facility, Unit 1, which had a license extension through 2034, ceased operations last year because of the cost of maintaining it and the availability of natural gas at a much cheaper price. And it ceased operations on September 20th, 2019 at noon. This is an event that is very pivotal in the history of nuclear power in this country. It really freaked people out and turned them against nuclear power. Births that occurred on this day. Henry Paulson was born on this day in 1946 in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the chief executive of Goldman Sachs and later would serve as U.S. Treasury Secretary from 2006 until 2009 when President Bush would leave office. And Mr. Paulson is best remembered for being Treasury Secretary during the Great Recession. And a lot of people have went back and looked at the Great Recession and the financial crisis that ensued, and they point the finger at him and place a lot of blame on him, not only for actions he took right afterwards, but for actions he took at Goldman Sachs. Mr. Paulson is a very controversial figure. I have watched many videos of him, and he does a good job of defending his record. I will say this: I have no opinion, favorable or unfavorable, of Mr. Paulson. I think he reacted the only way he could in the moment. Like he said in congressional testimony, there is no playbook for dealing with this type of situation, and I would agree. So, Henry Paulson. Some deaths that occurred on this day. In 1969, in Washington, D.C., at the age of 78, Dwight David Eisenhower resigned. And he was, among other things in his life, he was the Allied commander of Europe during World of NATO. He was the first one. He would serve as president of Columbia University. He would serve as chief of staff of the Army, and he would lead U.S. troops in Europe during World War II. And of course, he would be president of the United States from 1953 until 1961. Johnson is considered by many contemporaries probably more on the liberal Republican side to the more moderate Republican side. Both the Democrats and Republicans recruited him to run. Um, he was covertly opposed to Joe McCarthy. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and he sent U.S. troops to enforce federal court orders which integrated schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. He's most remembered now probably for the interstate highway system. Eisenhower, though, was very concerned about the rising military-industrialist complex, and he famously warned about it in his farewell speech to the nation. Eisenhower has undergone, like his predecessor, a serious reevaluation among historians. When he left office, most historians kind of rated him as a dunce, not, in fact, consequential, and really not that great of a president. And these two presidents is what leads me to believe you cannot rank a president fairly until about 20 to 30 years after they've left office. Because you have a lot of your own personal political feelings that get in the mix. You also, through that, have a lot of biases towards them. And you're not able to fairly, I do not believe, evaluate them. And also, it takes time for some things to develop. Eisenhower, let Kennedy know, because Kennedy was all about this missile gap that supposedly existed between the U.S. and Russia and the USSR. And Eisenhower was like, there is no missile gap. We have them outgunned. We just haven't promoted it. But Kennedy wanted the big show of force, and this led to the U.S. and, of course, Russia getting into the arms race. And there's that. He warned Kennedy about getting further involved in Vietnam. We saw how that turned out. So he has went through a serious reevaluation among historians, like Truman, and is now generally ranked in the top tier of presidents. I have seen some rankings where he's high as 4 and some as high as 3. I would tend to agree with that. I think he's very high up there. I don't know if I would go 3 or 4. I might go 5, possibly 6. But he is certainly a very consequential president, and definitely in the top 10. As I said, he would be succeeded in office by John F. Kennedy, and then by Lyndon Johnson, and when he passed away, his former vice president, Richard Nixon, had ascended to office. Him and Nixon had a complicated but loving relationship. He wanted Nixon to leave the ticket after the Checkers debacle before the speech. He wanted Nixon to announce in that speech that he was withdrawing as the vice presidential candidate. And there's a lot of people that believe that this is some of where Nixon's paranoia set in. He offered Nixon a chance to step away from the vice presidency after the first term and take a more prominent cabinet role or possibly run for another office to use as a springboard to the presidency, because the vice presidency's really never been a springboard from which you get elected directly to the presidency. There's only been just a few examples in history of that occurring, and up to that point, the most recent person to do it was Martin Van Buren, and afterward, of course, George H.W. Bush would accomplish it, and it hasn't been accomplished since. So you have that. Overall, just a great man. America lost a really fine leader and president when he passed away. So that is all I have for y'all tonight. I'll see you tomorrow.